Hello, my name is Andrea Thompson. I'm the director and founder of the Film Girl Film Festival, now streaming for a few more days, November 20th. And I am fortunate enough to have Maria Finitzo, the director of the documentary The Dilemma of Desire, with me today, remotely, of course. Maria, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And yes, your documentary, The Dilemma of Desire, discusses the clitoris, but it's about so much more, like the politics around female bodies, everyday life, the in jobs, and just moving through the world. It really resembles the wide variety of subjects you have speaking in the documentary. It's not defined by the defiance of, say, the administration that's on our way out, shall we say, and that's been voted out. But it is very much an act of defiance against forces that have been at work far longer than he's been in the White House. So,
right.
That's it's a long-winded question, but how did you maintain that balance of being defiant but not being defined by oppression?
Well, I think what's important when you're making any film is to come at it with sort of a range of emotion. And so I'm a huge fan of humor in a documentary. And I'm also a huge fan of pacing the emotions that I want my audience to feel. And so, you connect deeply with the women in the film, and then as they tell their stories, you get angry, and then you recognize that they're talking about things in your own life that you have experienced. And so maybe that makes you sad, that makes you happy, because now you're not alone. But this is a film that looks at all of the ways patriarchal structure gets in the way of initially women having agency over their sexual desire, and then as the film progresses, we expand that to saying, all bodies that are not essentially white heterosexual men. So that this is a film that sort of looks at the cages we're all in because of patriarchal structures. And while men are also in a cage, it's a pretty good looking cage, right? But everybody else is in a different cage. And so how you behave and how you try and get out of that, there's all kinds of things that get in your way. So really it's a film about power. When you start with the idea that you can't even get the truth about your anatomy, half the population of the world cannot even get the truth about their anatomy from a college level textbook, then you know what you're up against, right?
Oh God, yes. There's so many interesting facts in this movie that I could spout, and that I could devote a whole interview to in itself. The fact that clitoris wasn't extracted from the human body in 1998. The fact that many female biologists, and when I interviewed the jurors, all of them cited your film. They're like, I had no idea what this looked like either. And the female biologist in your film also didn't either. She said she didn't know what her own anatomy looked like. And throughout this film, you discover the obstacles to women talking about real female pleasure. So not being able to advertise their work, whatever it was. So I guess my question for you is, did you face a lot of obstacles in getting this made?
Well, initially, when I decided I wanted to make a film like this, you never have a fully formed idea at the beginning of developing a documentary. You have a sort of an idea what you want to do, but you don't know how it's going to end up. And so I knew I wanted to make a film about female sexual pleasure and our lives as sexual beings, but I didn't know that what I wanted to do until I did more research was look at all of the ways, and this was back in 2012, all of the obstacles that get in the way of women having agency over that desire, right? So why in this current time, why now, after the sexual revolution in the 60s, are women still lied to? And so when I connected the idea of female sexual pleasure to the notion of women's equality and the way we're viewed in the world, and that it's a human right to be able to know the truth about your body and own that knowledge. That became a film that some people found very threatening.
Yeah.
And so that made it hard to fund. Like if I just sexual pleasure and everybody thought it was about, wild women having sex and all of that, then probably people would have thrown money at me. But when I tied it to the social issue of equality and the rights of all bodies to be entitled to the pleasure they're capable of, and the entitlement of all human beings to have their experience in life validated and respected, then that's a whole different ballgame. And so our funders, actually, our main funders, two of our main funders were actually men. And so I had a hard time.
That's here and here, actually.
Yeah, I had a hard time funding the film. And I think this is a topic that people are still afraid of, because it challenges all of the notions, all of the lies and myths women are told about sex, sexual pleasure, and their bodies, and says they're not true, right? Stacey Dutton says at the beginning of the film, women are lied to about where their pleasure comes from, right? It's a lie.
Yes,
and that
definitely.
Some people find that very threatening, hard to hear.
Oh yeah, like your remarks and the stuff you go into about the porn industry and everything. I was reminded of a quote by I can't remember who it was, about the 60s and 70s and the feminist movement. They said men were fine with their wives having sex, but not so much thinking. So yeah.
Not so much thinking?
Yeah, they were fine with them having sex, but when they actually started to examine the politics around sex, then they got
nervous, right? Well, porn is a discourse about gender, and what bad porn or mainstream porn teaches people about gender is, that women are there for the consumption of men at their pleasure and in ridiculous kind of ways, and it's not even remotely related to their pleasure or their humanity, right?
Well, even most of the porn that gets a lot of attention and gets marketed to women, that still kind of reinforces a lot of
absolutely. Absolutely, right. Yeah,
and of course that brings 50 Shades to mind.
Yeah.
Oh God.
What's unfortunate is that a lot of kids, because they're not getting adequate sex education, they get their sex education from porn. And so girls are taught that that's the way women behave, and boys are taught that that's the way women are supposed to behave.
And how men are supposed to be.
And that's not how men are supposed to behave. And so that in itself is what's problematic.
So how did you get the idea for this film in the first place?
I read a book by a writer named Daniel Bergner called The Science of Female Sexual Pleasure, What Do Women Want? I think that's the title. And in the book, the writer he was a journalist, went around and he interviewed scientists who were studying women's sexual desire with women as subjects, instead of sort of extrapolating from what it might be based on what men want, right? Let's ask what they want. And the end of the book, to sort of simplify it down, was all of the scientists said women have as robust a sex drive as men. They're simply told lies about it to reinforce patriarchal structures. And so for me as a filmmaker, that is what I was interested in, because here was science telling women, you have as robust a sex drive as men. And then me as a filmmaker saying, well, that's really great. Now, what are women supposed to do with that information? Since we're not exactly free to behave however we want. And so that was the beginning of the film, which was to look at why aren't women equal in the bedroom, right? And then if you ask the question, why aren't they equal in the bedroom? Then that leads very nicely into why aren't they equal in the classroom or the boardroom or the synagogue or the church, or politics or in general. And so, our equality starts with how we're treated around our sexuality, and it goes from there. So if you can be lied to about the truth of your anatomy, there's no way you're going to be seen as an equal human being, an equal partner in society at large.
And that really was the common thread. You had a wide variety of subjects, from experts to just women of various ages, a lot of them women of color, some were privileged white women, some were immigrants, some had lived in the US all their lives, some had more regular jobs, some were like more activists. But the common thread for each of these women was, I really had to fight to not only discover my voice, who I was, my pleasure, but that my voice mattered. So I guess you expected that, but
Well, you
yeah.
don't necessarily expect anything when you're making a film. You try and stay open to what your subjects will tell you. I certainly knew from my own experience as a cisgendered woman, heterosexual cisgendered woman, what my life had been like. But I think I was surprised to hear that, that women ranged in ages from early 20s to 40. And so that's a pretty good range. I was surprised to hear that things had really not changed much since, I don't know, the 1950s. And in fact, they've gotten worse for women. So they've gotten worse for young women like my daughter's age, right? And my son and my daughter, when they, in high school, this is a while ago now, decided to go out in the world and explore whether they were going to be sexual people, there were no guardrails, right? And so we live in a culture that tells girls and women, you can behave however you want. And that's really not true. And so that makes that landscape.
You can what? Sorry, I didn't get that.
You can behave
however you want.
So everybody tells women, hookup culture is great. Go ahead and do whatever you want. And when women do that, when young women do that, they don't have people saying, oh, okay, that's what they did. They have the same old tropes remain. They're slut shamed. They, they're not seen as equal partners. Women don't speak up in these encounters. I interviewed a lot of young women before I chose the women in my film, and I would ask them if they participated in the hookup culture. A lot of them did, and I said, great. What, tell me about it. Why do you do that? And almost all of them said that they never asked for their own pleasure in return for participating in a sexual encounter. And when I would ask them why, say, oh, that's too much trouble, And so that means that as a human being, you think that you're not entitled to get something in exchange for sharing your body with another human being. And that's very sad. So
I can relate to that feeling also, of course. You're just not taught to put yourself first. You're taught to serve, even as the culture has supposedly gotten more progressive.
That's right. Girls are raised to think that their bodies are receptacles of male pleasure. They're not raised to think that within their body they have the capacity for enormous pleasure that has nothing to do with another human being, and that they deserve that. So imagine if we taught young girls the truth about their anatomy. Like really young girls. And instead of teaching them about their body with shame or, fear or all the other things that we do to kids when they're young, that might change the way they operate in the world. It would definitely change the way they operate in the world. Decided to make sexual choices, whatever age they did that, they would have much more knowledge to make those choices on.
You mentioned that you think it's gotten worse. Can you tell me why you came to that conclusion?
So when I was growing up, there were a set of norms, right or wrong, that sort of told you how you should behave, right? And it was very clear if you broke outside of those norms, how you would be viewed, right? So girls, women who were sexually promiscuous when I was growing up were seen as, bad girls, sluts. Like you didn't want to, you might be promiscuous with them, but you didn't marry those women, okay? So this is a long time ago. So those were guardrails, right? And if you chose to follow those guardrails. At least you had guardrails. Then, with the advent of birth control and the women's revolution and the sexual revolution, all that was supposed to have been wiped away. And for a time, it was. What was left, however, so young women going to college were encouraged to, if they wanted to have sex, they should have sex. They didn't have to be emotionally attached to anybody to have sex, et cetera, et cetera. And so they chose, and do choose, to behave that way. But the old misogyny, the misogynistic culture remains in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why there's a culture of rape. That's why girls and young women entering their freshman year of college, 15% of them will be raped by somebody they might know. And so that's what I'm talking about, having to be more dangerous. There was a lot of things I worried about when I went to a bar when I was in my 20s, but somebody putting a drug in my drink in order to be able to rape me was not one of them. And yet when my daughter and her friends went out, right, into bars when they were in college or even afterwards, they had a rule that nobody was A, ever left alone, and B, if somebody lost track of their drink, they threw it out. So imagine,
that's kind of the rule you have to go by when you go to a bar.
Imagine all that a young woman has to go through now when she thinks
but not
about
when you go with your boyfriend.
Yeah, basically. To have fun, right?
Yeah, but not with your boyfriend.
She's not raped, right? Yeah. Right.
So you're viewed as another man's property, and there's a very low chance that they won't do that to you. I found.
I guess. I don't know.
It's a very different.
Yeah. So I think that's
what I've found in my experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm not. I might have to. I don't know. I didn't. I might have to slightly say maybe it hasn't. I'm not sure if it's gotten worse though, as much as just been more out in the open. Because I don't know, I hear stories from women. It just seems to be the same, only more open, I guess, from my perspective.
That's possible. Yeah. I can only look at it from my perspective as someone who grew up in a different time and watched the experience of my children as they were growing up. And it sort of struck me that, it seemed a little bit easier to get through college when I was going to college.
I see.
Than it does these days. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know either, but it does kind of bring me to my next question. You made a very deliberate choice because, as I'm sure you, just listening to you talk, it's clear you have stories too, similar to the women you profile, but you made a very conscious decision to keep yourself out and focus on them. So I was wondering, like, you barely even hear your voice, and that's more towards the end. So I was wondering why you made that choice.
So I don't ever put myself in my documentaries. I'm in my documentaries in the sense that you're watching something that I care deeply about, issues that I care deeply about. You're watching a film in which I've connected very deeply with the people in my films and have built an incredible trust. And so you are, in a sense, seeing me in my films, right? But as a subject, I don't ever put myself in my films. And I think that there are filmmakers who do, and that when they do, there's usually a real strong reason why they're in the film, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's important. That's an important creative choice. And so I, except for my voice, stay behind the camera and stay on the other side of the line. And that's just kind of, for me, what works. I'm not making a film about myself. One of the things I do really well is turn attention onto other people. And so that's why I do that, right? I want someone else to tell their story. I don't really want to tell my story. And in a sense, by allowing other people to speak and have that spotlight, I'm sharing with you a part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. And how exactly did you get such intimate access to much of your subjects, not just through their work, like, but also in their homes and with them being intimate with their family and their relationships.
So that's if all of my films are verite films, and they follow individuals over a course of time, and that means access to all aspects of their life. And so the way that happens for me is at the beginning of a project, when I'm looking for a subject, I'm very, very clear with them about what it means to be in a film, right? So a lot of times people might think it might be fun, or I'll give them things to say or things like that, but that's not, of course, the way it is. And so I always make sure that someone who says, I'm interested in being in your film, then understands exactly what that means. And so when you're really clear that way, it usually, it always, for me, it always goes well. And I tell the people who say, I want to be in your film, and then when I say, okay, I really would like you to be in my film, I tell them that I'm going to commit to them and their story. And that when I do that, that means I'm bringing all of my resources as a filmmaker. So all of the money I've raised to hire the crew and the people who come, and my own time and my own investment into their lives. And that what I ask in return is that they commit to me. Because if I'm going to show up at your home to film with you or follow you at work, I've hired people to work for me. And that's a huge financial investment. And I've also invested in you emotionally. And so I kind of ask people to, even though this might get tedious or boring, or it may at times be difficult for you, too emotional, that you stick with me. And it's always worked, right? I've never had anybody say, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's just the way I do it, right? And also I commit, if I put somebody in a film, I don't ever decide, I don't know, halfway through that I'm going to drop them as a subject, right? I don't do that. So even if I'm having a difficult time finding their story or figuring out how to tell their story, I don't give up. I sort of say to myself, well, you need to do this better. You need to do a better job as a filmmaker in finding their story. Now, there are other filmmakers who do drop subjects. I don't. Precisely because of what I just said. If I'm committing to them and they're committing to me, then I'm not going to give up. So.
And how did you find many of these subjects? Like, some of them are rather obvious, like Sophia Wallace and the founder of Crave. But how did you come across some of the others, like kind of like the
So I found the women who are sort of the younger women. So the women who have sort of a public profile, whose lives and professions revolve around talking about sex or studying sexual desire, or all of the different things. So T. Chang, Stacey Dutton, and Sophia, they're not easy to find, but they're easily found if you start doing research on the internet, right? But finding everyday women, right, who are not involved in that kind of thing, you have to, the way I did it is my producers and I reached out to a network of everybody we knew, and said, we're going to have a meeting at such and such a time and at a certain place, and we want you to invite anybody you know who identifies as female, who's cisgendered female, who might be interested in this film, and invite them to come. And so I did, and I ended up with a room full of about 45 people. And I showed them a clip of the film, and then we began to talk. And one of the first things one of the women in the room said, and nobody knew each other, I'd never met any of these women. One of the women in the room said was, I'm so happy to have this conversation. We never get to talk about this. And so we had a great conversation. Everybody did. sharing all kinds of stuff. And then at the end, I said, if you're interested in being considered to be a subject of the film, fill out this questionnaire, leave it at the desk, and I will contact you and interview you. And that's how I found the 5 women who are in the film.
Wow, that seems hard and difficult at the same time. And for a more difficult question, there are a variety of women of color and perspectives in the film. Like, you obviously decide to embrace that from the beginning. Was how do you? Well, I'm just gonna ask, how do you kind of manage, like, the differences in privilege you encountered? Like, how did you decide? How did you integrate that so seamlessly? Because nobody's tokenized, and I've noticed that in some films that try to emphasize so many perspectives, that's a danger, as I'm sure you've noticed too.
You know, I have been doing this a long time, and I don't look at people as, oh, this is my token person in the film, or, oh, I'm going to have this person in the film because they fit into this bucket. I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I look at them as human beings. And it was very important for me to have a range of voices in this film, because even with 9 subjects, right, this film is really only the beginning of a conversation, because there are so many other stories about sexual pleasure and, women's sexual pleasure and people who identify as women. There's just so much more to this conversation, that this is just the beginning. And so I was mostly interested, I look for people, one, who will enjoy the experience of being in the film. 2, who are exploring things in their own life that will help me tell the story around, in this case, sexual pleasure. And 3, who are, who are just interested in going forward with me on this journey. And so that's what happens. And, it was from the beginning, I was committed, and so were my producers, to having a completely diverse team in front of the camera, behind the camera. And so the people who worked on my film represented that same diversity, right? So I had women, non-binary people, straight people, gay people, queer people, the whole thing. And that was just the way the whole process was going to go. And it's just the kind of the way I look at the world, and the way I want to explore the world is through the perspective of a lot of different people, and a lot of different voices. And so it was a conscious choice, but it wasn't a choice to pinhole somebody, oh, this person has to be this way, or this person has to, check this box. That's not the way I look at people.
And a lot of filmmakers don't think they're looking at the world that way, but why do you think that does happen so often? Though I think the reasons are obvious, but I like your perspective. And how do you think it can be avoided? You mentioned hiring more people, a diverse team. Do you think that's the key?
I think that's part of the key, but I think it's also important. How do I even say this? I think it's really important to think about your own perspective and how you're coming to this project, and the questions you want answered, and how the freedom you give people to be who they are, and tell you who they are and tell their stories. And so that's just something that I've always done pretty well. I mean, I said earlier that one of the best, I have a talent. It's that I pay attention to other people really well. And I think that's what's most important when you're making a film. If the film is not about you, if you're looking you're not looking inward, but you're rather looking out at other people, then I think the more attention you pay to them, the more open, the more safe they feel in sharing with you who they are. And I think that's really the key.
So you think the mindset has to change more?
Well, it's a much more complicated conversation. I think that there's
it seems so simple the way you say it,
but there's a really important conversation right now that's been going on in the documentary community, and for a while now, very important, and that's who gets to tell the story, right? So I think that's an important as well, is what's your connection to the story you're telling in the community within your story. And so my connection to this community was as a cisgendered woman, you know, who knows the experience of a cisgendered woman. And so that's what I brought. It wasn't just about, I didn't want it to be a film just about white women. Can't even imagine that. As a woman, that's what I came to this film and from and what my perspective was. So I don't know how else.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have. And like I said, your film shouldn't be so unusual, but not unusual, but it's just very that matter of fact. But yet it's something that I often don't see when I watch other documentaries about this subject. So,
well, I had a really excellent editor, Liz Carr, and then I also brought another young woman named Mimi Wilcox, and that helps as well. And also being a part of Cartemplin Films and having, you know, a community of filmmakers who've been making films for a very long time helps also, right? So it's kind of the community people that you work with and surround yourself with helps you figure out, helps you make a really good film, I guess is what I'm saying. It's you know, it's a team effort. It's not, filmmaking isn't something you do by yourself. You have to have a really good team.
Definitely. And I'm really curious as to what the mood was like on set while you were making this, because you're discussing some pretty taboo topics, and in some cases very heavy, very personal topics. And so what was the mood like?
Well, it's not so much a mood, but rather a connection with the people that I was working with, and the connection to the people in the film. And so there's a real connection of trust, and that's what always happened, and respect, right? So you have to respect the people who are in your film, and you know, you have to, because otherwise they won't trust you. And so I never showed up unannounced, right? I didn't like come in on somebody, say I'm filming now. I always get permission to come film. I talk to them about why I want to film. I ask them if it's okay if, you know, are you comfortable with me filming whatever's going on? And so there's communication. And the people that I was a very small group, a lot of times they were the same people over and over again, because I filmed for at least, I don't know, years. And so people came to know the people on the crew. The people in the film came to know the people on the crew as friends. Like I wasn't showing up with a completely different crew every single time, right? So it becomes like a family in a way. And that's the way I like to have my shoots go. I like it to be very relaxed. And because if it's not relaxed, then you're not going to get the material you want to get when you film. So I like people to forget that I'm there with a camera. And if I'm screaming at people or yelling at the sound person or, you know, demanding that people behave a certain way, then that's really going to not work at all. So it's always a very relaxed atmosphere.
And you explore a variety of subjects in this film. How did you decide what to explore and what to really delve into?
Well, I really let the people in my film,
what you touch on and what you delve into.
right. I kind of let what I delve into come out of the stories of the people I've chosen to be in the film. And so while I might choose them in the beginning because I think that this might be their story or something else might be their story, it always changes. And so you have to go where your subjects take you, right? You have to go where your subjects take you. And so that's how I do it. It's an exploration, and it's something that evolves over time. Like as in the film, things change and you go in one direction or that direction, depending on the kind of material you're getting. And so you have to be very open to not necessarily knowing how the story is going to turn out, because you don't, right? You don't.
No, you really don't. Like some of the footage that made such an impression on me was footage supplied by Unia was her name.
Wedding footage.
Yeah, her wedding footage, and it was clear that she didn't know what she wanted. It was so sad because it was clear she was completely ill-equipped, and all her family and friends were like, I wonder why she's doing this. It's heartbreaking. And is there like a story behind like how she decided to provide that? Because it is so deeply personal, and like I said, it was so heartbreaking.
No, the story was I asked her if she had a video of her wedding, and she said yes, and handed it to me.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, that's what I mean when I say trust. So that's just what I mean, right? So she'd said, no, you can't use it. I would have said, okay. Right. So.
Yep. And a really good source that you used both at the start and the end of the documentary, you chose Audre Lorde. Why did you decide to kind of bookend the film with her work, with her words?
Well, so I was familiar with her work, but right from the beginning of the film, several women that I would interview, you ought to read an essay called Uses of the Erotic by Audre Lorde. And so I did. And then as I was filming, three of the women in the film were very connected to that essay. Rayama, Becca, we don't show Becca's connection in the film, it ended up getting cut. And Sophia Wallace's work is also very informed by that scholarship. And so it was just that essay, if you haven't read it, is an extraordinary essay. And it's just so encapsulates what we're talking about when you disconnect women from a source of their power, both personally and politically, which is a knowledge of their own body and a sense of the erotic, right? So it's not pornographic, it's not about sex, but it's a life force. And so by denying women that knowledge, you are disconnecting them from a vital source of their power and their and the way they can imagine the possibilities of their life. And she goes on to say that once that happens, women, once women are in touch with the power of the erotic, then they realize that they won't settle for less, and that they won't settle, and they'll demand more of themselves. And that to me was a really important theme in the film. And so I had always I knew I would begin the film with her words in the opening title sequence, and I always wanted to end the film the way I did. And I was happy that I was able to.
Oh yes, you could see kind of you had them read it at the end, and you could see kind of their eyes lighting up as they read it, because it was clear that some of them were encountering Lorde's writing for the first time, and it was really incredible.
I'm gonna have to get off pretty soon, so I have another thing to do.
Pretty soon, do you mean 6:30 or earlier?
No, not by 6:30. I need to get off in the next few minutes.
Okay. What do you want people to take from your film then?
What I'd like them to take from the film is the truth, right? That
Mhm.
an idea that human beings deserve to know the truth about their anatomy, deserve to own the knowledge of their bodies, and that we wouldn't ever think to deny that knowledge to the male population. That would be absurd to imagine that we didn't tell boys that they had a penis or what it was for. But
Mhm.
that's what we do to people born female. And so
Mhm.
that's not fair. And
Definitely not.
and you can have a lot of different opinions about all kinds of different things, but not allowing the truth about your anatomy and sexual pleasure and where it comes from for any human being is to deny them a basic human right. And so that's really what this film is about. And I just want people to recognize that they have a right to know. They're entitled to know. And I think that um, men who have partners, women and partners would be happy to know how to make the encounters, the sexual encounter that's happening between them better for their partners. I think that everybody wants to make it better, right? And I
Mhm.
think that the choices we make as human beings, the sexual choices we make as human beings, are some of the most intimate choices we make.
Oh, yes.
And they are a vital part of our humanity. And no one should control that or criticize it or criminalize it. It is something that belongs to the individual making that choice. And that's really what this film is about.
And what's up next for you?
Oh, I don't know. What's up next is me getting the film out into the world and distributed and on a platform to other festivals and an engagement campaign. And so just getting to the film to as many people as possible.
Here's hoping. You probably have to go then.
I do, but thank you very much.
All right.
And
Thank you for joining me.
and good luck with the rest of your festival.
Thank you. And thanks for allowing me to have you and your film as a part of the festival.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Night.